Welcome on Democracy with FP Wellman. I am Fred Wellman. I hope you're in the right place. If you're not, hang out. You never know. You might find out something interesting. We don't care. It'd be great to have you. You know, I like to start each show off with a story from the week that kind of got my attention, and I want to bring to you guys. And of course, as we often see the New York Times, two competing stories with two different storylines came out from the same paper, which, to be honest, is one of the things I love about the New York Times. You know, you're going to get what you get. And what it's about is two different articles came out analyzing youth voting patterns and voting patterns in general from an organization called Catalyst. And Catalyst is a group that analyzes post-election results in detail, not just the old, exit polls and stuff like that. They actually go after the numbers and go in great depth. And they've come out with their 2022 analysis. And it's very interesting. And what the first story in the New York Times talked about was there's been a shift in older millennials shifting rightward. That when you look at this chart that they showed in their story, that more millennials and older Americans are moving just to the right. Just to the right. But here's the thing, and I think people freaked out like they always do. It goes right to that old canard of the Republicans that when you buy a house, you become conservative, right? But what was really interesting to me is a second story came out from David Leonhardt that dives deeper into the actual voting by actual age group and political leanings. And there's a first chart. We'll throw that first chart up on screen if you're watching. If you're listening, I'll explain it. And they go by votes by age in the midterms elections in how they contest the states. And it shows consistent upturn in voting across all age groups until you get to above 40, right? And what it shows is a dramatic drop off in older voters that traditionally vote Republican as the boomers age and they pass away. And that drop off is frankly countering any increase in conservative leanings from younger generations. But wait, there's more. A second chart shows, we'll put that up, shows that in 2022 midterms, voters aged 18 to 29 voted 64% Democratic, and those aged 30 to 44 voted 58% Democratic. And then it shifts to Republican for those over the age of 45. And taken together, this shows that political shifts are being beaten by demographic shifts faster. In other words, while some millennials and others are turning more rightward, the base of the Republican voting base, the older generation, the boomers, are dropping off the voting base, be it from old age or inability to vote. But so consistently, you've got two things at work here. You've got the demographics and you've got a younger generation, which is very, very active and clearly running much more liberal than their predecessors at a 64% vote. So it's really interesting. There's optimism there, but caution, because the caution part of this whole conversation before we get on with the show is they also did find that working class Americans are shifting to the Republican Party. What had been a traditional base of the Democratic Party is, as a class, shifting rightward. So can they beat the demographic shift? Will that overturn it? What can the Democrats do about that? Lots to talk about that in other places, but I just want to start with that. So it's kind of interesting. I love good stats, and I love to start that way off. So let's just get right into the show. I got great guests I've been eager to have back on. So with that, let's get on with the show. All right, man, welcome back. Welcome to the show on Democracy FP Wellman right here on the Midas Touch Network or wherever you get your favorite podcast. We're everywhere, man. We're doing great. Thanks to all of you joining our community. I can't thank you enough for being part of it. So our guest this week was our very first guest on Democracy over a year ago when it was on Call-In app, which is a train wreck, and God bless her, she put up with that and still joined the show. I think we had like 15 listeners. It was incredible. Actually, we had more than that because everyone wants to see Rachel. So our guest is my friend and my dear friend, Rachel Vindman. Rachel's a wife, mom, podcast host, writer, activist, co-host of the Suburban Women Problem podcast, and an advisory board member for the Renewed Democracy Initiative. You know, if you do know Rachel, after her husband, retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, was involved in the first impeachment hearing of Donald Trump, she realized she needed to be more politically active. So one of her favorite ways to do that is to help other women find their way to activism. She's found her voice as an activist and, frankly, plain spoken political commentator on Twitter. And you can follow her there at NatSecHobby. Oh my God, I'm so glad to have you back on the show, Rachel. Great to see you. There you go. How are you?
You
You did it.
I don't even remember how how to use Zoom. I mean, how long we've been using Zoom for 3 years now, and I still struggle. But
it's okay.
Thank you so much for having me back. It is my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, here in our fancy new studio, we're big time.
Yes, I know.
No phone apps for us, I tell you. So it's well, I'm glad to have you. Welcome to Maya's Touch Network. Great to have you on the network. Always glad to see a fellow podcast host who's been banging it for 2 years now and doing great. We really appreciate you. I did a video. Let's just jump right in. I did a video this week for the Maya's Touch Network about the Washington Post examination of the book removal requests for the year up to 2022. And they found that a small but highly energetic minority has been driving much of this. And of course, Moms for Liberty is driving that. And what's really interesting, I don't know if you saw the news, but this week, the Southern Poverty Law Center, for the first time, designated Moms for Liberty as an anti-government extremist group, along with 11 other of these parents' rights group. And within that, these guys are driving a lot of this. It's coordinating an ongoing assault on our kids. I mean, what kind of impact are you saying? You've been really in diving into the family issues, the parenting issues. I mean, this is right in your wheelhouse. What does that tell you that they're now an extremist group? I mean, that's probably not a surprise to you, right?
It doesn't surprise me, and they probably enjoyed being labeled an extremist group. If we're being honest with ourselves, I mean, that's probably a feather in their cap.
Yeah.
But I think it's an apt description. These are extremist groups. They are anti-public school. They are anti-government. It's remarkable to me. You and I have discussed this before, that somehow the party of small government and personal responsibility is all up in our business about what we can and can't do.
Yeah.
And there's no personal responsibility. I mean, they're going to tell you what your personal responsibility is and what you need to do. And it's kind of quasi-religious in that way, don't you think? But they don't trust anyone to make their own decisions, and that includes what books your children read, apparently. Right. And it just couldn't be further from what the Republican Party purports to be. Right. And I think it's really important to draw that out, to show that as a mirror to those people who just are so intent on, but we need a second party. We need someone else. And we can't just, all the stupid arguments. Okay. Right. But could you pick maybe some normal people with normal beliefs if that's what you insist upon?
Well, that's it, right? I mean, a lot of folks, we do see them, and you're a former Republican like me. We were both just voters. We weren't political activists until the last, 3 or 4, thanks to Donald Trump. I think you and I share that background, but you're right. We do hear, I mean, we both run in the similar circles of a lot of former Republicans who many aren't terribly
that gets
former.
us in trouble.
Right. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, well, that's exactly it. It does, because we're not trusted by anybody. Obviously, I'm okay with that. But it is interesting to have these conversations. But I'm consistently shocked by how many still believe there's a Republican Party to save. Right? I mean, I think actually, I think Bill Kristol tweeted out an article today about how deep it is. I think even he's come to the realization there's just not much to save. And you live and breathe that on a daily basis. I think. Is there anything to save? And is it shocking to you there's still people who think they can?
It is shocking to me. So my husband was born in the former Soviet Union. His father was a member of the Communist Party. And he sees the he sees the danger of that, of a one-party system. And so, I mean, not everyone is a former communist. So that's not everyone, but I think this alarm of we can't be one party. We have to have two parties. Okay, but could you have a second party, again, of normal people? Right. And that's just not what exists right now. So I laugh when people say that I want to return to the Republican Party. I mean, it basically is non-existent in my view. There is no in my lifetime, there will not be a functional Republican Party. And it's way too early to even think about whatever the replacement might be. And, anyone who's a student of history knows that we've had different parties that have risen and fallen. I mean, we've had this two-party system for a very long time, but that hasn't always been the case in the history of the United States. So it's conceivable that something could emerge, but that's not going to be for any, I don't foresee it in my lifetime. I mean, I suppose anything is possible, but it's going to be a long time. And for now, let me just publicly state, I am a very loyal member of the Democrat Party, and I will do whatever I can to make sure that Democrats are elected. But we have a lot of people in this party, in this big tent, and there are a lot of differing views, and that's okay. We need to talk about them. That's one of the things we do on my podcast. You know, we have lots of different, women from our network give us all kinds of topics and things they want to talk about, and we talk about them, and we try to demystify so many of these things because we're just bombarded with misinformation. And that's what Moms for Liberty, you mentioned them, that's what they do. What the 11 other groups do. They're intent on giving you 20% of the story, making it sensational, and just causing outrage. And unfortunately, in this era post-COVID, when our children are still struggling, I have a 12-year-old, we still have academic effects of learning during COVID. But I mean, there are also side effects of chemotherapy.
Right.
We did the best that we could, but we need to look at it and say, yeah, we've got to deal with these problems now, but hey, we're alive, and we got through the pandemic, but now we have to address this. But unfortunately, that situation is just really ripe and for misinformation to breed. And I think what you see are opportunists who have co-opted this situation and are trying to use it for their own political and personal gain. And it's really just all about power.
Yeah, I think in the end, that's really accurate. It does become powered, both locally. I think what's really insidious about these groups, these 12 that have been designated, especially in Moms for Liberty, is the way they are very vocal at the local level. I mean, these are the people who were showing me at the school board meetings. There's been a number of articles this week about how, you get screamed at meetings, and now they've coalesced into this movement of book banning and running as school board candidates. And you're seeing a backlash. I think there's been a couple of articles. Greg Sargent wrote a piece a couple weeks ago about how people are standing up and saying, enough's enough. It is. I mean, we saw it right here, even in St. Louis, where I live, which is pretty red. Missouri is very red. They were able to defeat a number of these Moms for Liberty endorsed candidates. They're very very helpful. They actually list them for you so you can grab them, know who you're up against. And you're right. I think go back to what you said was really key though, and it goes back to a topic I have in my script to talk about later, which is this vicious hatred that we face anytime you stand up to these folks. And one of them, I just saw it recently. Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley tried to say that girls are under assault because they have to deal with the idea of men being in the locker room with them because they want to play sports, and that's leading to girls wanting to commit suicide. She actually used the rising teen suicide rate and blaming transgender youth for it, right? And I'll tell you what's interesting to me is the interactions you get as public figures. Is I tweeted about that and how ridiculous it was that the kids are committing suicide for a host of reasons, obviously, but not the least of which is gun deaths, and violence and inequality and everything else. And what was interesting to me is I look at the replies is, oh, so you're okay with men being in a girl's bathroom? Are you a groomer? It's like, holy shit. It's they're so brilliant at taking a message and making it insidious. So it's the old right. When did you stop beating your wife? Canard, right? It's like, wait a minute, I never stopped. Wait a minute, and you've dealt with this obviously since day one, since the day Alex stepped forward. You've had to face some vicious hate from these people. I mean, so it's not a shock to you that they're an extremist group in your opinion. And so circling over to the suburban women problem. You guys launched your podcast not long before the Virginia governor's race. It was actually during the heat of the campaign. One of the hot takes after that race was that suburban women had switched over and voted. Yeah. Catalyst, by the way, I was actually looking at the results of that race, and I was living in Virginia and I just left. And Catalyst found that actually wasn't quite accurate, right? That the exit polls had said that wasn't. It was the fact I talked about last week's show with John Nichols from The Nation that actually they just didn't run a campaign targeting youth. They didn't run a campaign targeting rural voters. But it goes to what you guys are going for. So let's talk about for you guys. What is the suburban women problem, and what is the movement to address that issue for you?
Right. I want to say one thing about that campaign. Yesterday, I interviewed Representative Alyssa Slotkin.
Oh, yeah. All right.
And who was just amazing. And I like to talk to people who are really good at NatSec and policy, but that can talk to me on my level, because that's not where I'm not my husband. So it was really great. But one of the things, she talked about, because we talked about the wins and the victories in Michigan. And I was asking her, how did this happen? Everyone's wanting to know how you happened. And you know what she said? We had a plan. We had a plan. And I think that's probably what what you were just talking about, the catalyst piece, is that in Virginia in 2021, there really wasn't a plan, if we're being honest.
Yeah,
so
let's be honest.
I mean, and that's something we need to be honest about and we need to deal with. I mean, there were lots of factors, but that was definitely one of them.
Yeah.
So what is the suburban women problem? Well, for those of you who may not know, and maybe it's good if you don't, but right before the 2018 midterms and the Donald Trump's one-term presidency, they knew they were going to get really, beaten badly. And Senator Lindsey Graham said, we have a suburban women problem. And to that, I say, I agree with you, Senator. It's rare, but you did and you do have a huge suburban women problem. Suburban women are really in this, like, the last pure purple districts, throughout our country. Even in red states and blue states, a lot of suburbia is purple.
Yep. Right where I live.
And we're like under assault because of that. It's just constant with us. I mean, people are trying to target, but trying to target our, covet our votes and get our votes. But in that, you have a lot of extremist groups making a move, making a play. So there's been this whole movement. I know me as a military spouse, but just also as a mom, I mean, I didn't talk about politics a lot. And then it's kind of a use it or lose it thing. I mean, you feel a little bit of an imposter. For instance, I lived in DC where, I mean, the person next to you might be like, I don't know. I can't give an example, but one time I was in a synagogue meeting and we were talking about doing something with the cost of living index, and people were like, what is that? And then one of the members, like, it was a Zoom meeting, gets on. I was like, oh, actually, I'm like head of, comms at the Treasury Department or whatever, Commerce, whoever like sets that. And you're like, only in DC does that happen.
Right.
But that's how it is in DC. You're like in a meeting and you don't even know at the PTA, you're like sitting next to someone who just made this policy or wrote this bill. Yep. So it can really be intimidating when you're just trying to discuss like basic things. So I think it's not just in DC, it's everywhere. We just kind of retreat to what's most comfortable to us, is what's the stuff we're doing every day.
Right.
But because so many people have done that, and not just women, but we've lost like kind of the skill and the ability to talk about these things, to talk critical things, that the extremism. And we're like, oh, maybe it'll just go away, or that's unpleasant. I've met so many women who live in places where they're like, let's just not put up signs for school board because it's just going to cause problems. And actually, I didn't meet those women. I met like their neighbors who said that, like, we just don't want to get involved. And they just want it to go over and go away. But as we can see, that's not happening. And it's not going to happen until we stand up and we take it back and we say, we have to have these conversations. We have to correct this disinformation. So that's kind of, that's really what we try to do on our podcast, is to say, I mean, it's two parts, really. It's to, like, today's episode that came out, I'm so proud of it because we do like a main interview, and I did, we rotate who does that. And I did it with Sarah K. Ellis, who is the president and CEO of GLAAD. And it was just a really wonderful interview. She was a pleasure. And then we have an interview that all three of us do together. And we interviewed a mom and daughter, Mindy and Lily. And Lily is 16 and a half year old transgender girl and living in Pennsylvania. And it was so great. I mean, because the fact of the matter is Nikki Haley can say what she wants about girls are afraid to play sports and everything. But I would say to Nikki Haley, can you give me an example of when that happened, Nikki? I'm just curious. And I'll be respectful. Ambassador Haley, can you give me an example of when that happened? And I don't think she could. No. I mean, she might be able to give one, maybe two. Yeah. But no more than that. It's been used as a fear tactic.
Yes.
And I think once you know this is happening, you can identify that. And when your friends bring it up, you can listen to podcasts like mine. You can, because it's very difficult to find some of these sources, and you can say, that's not actually true.
Right.
And to your friend, and you can say it with confidence. You don't have to have an imposter syndrome. You can say, and you can say it gently and let them go, research it on their own. But the important thing is that you push back. And I hope through our podcast and through Red Wine and Blue, which is the group that produces it, that we're having those conversations and giving people confidence to be able to bring up these issues. Because if we don't have conversations and we don't talk to people and we're not willing to dispel some of this disinformation and fight back, we are going to be victims of it in a major way, more than we are now.
I think that's so key, and I love that you brought that up. It is true. We've reached a point where we don't have these conversations anymore. We can't have a level-headed conversation about the issues, and when they are brought up, I think a lot of us, especially who have been pummeled by it, tend to just let it go. Right? We're like, well, I don't want to argue with you. You're nuts. But you're right. If we don't have these conversations, and if we're not armed with the information to have these conversations, we can't. And it's the classic story, right? Where we talk about here in Missouri, where there's more transgender sports bills offered this year than there's ever been a kids participating in, sports, the youth sports, the transgender youth who want to participate. And no one ever wants to talk about the fact that the majority of those who are trying to play sports, majority of transgender youth who want to play sports are women. Are they? All right. Okay. It's women who are going to be in boys sports, not the other way around. By far, an overwhelming majority are the opposite direction, which they never ever want to talk about. They only want to talk about saving girls' sports. So it's just a big propaganda smokescreen. And it's great to hear your group. And doesn't Red Wine and Blue have a new initiative? I think you mentioned to me in our pre-show that they're to have these conversations more directly, or you've heard a lot of these conversations. Tell me about what you guys are doing now. I mean, it's a great organization. I mean, you guys have been around for a while. It's not new.
Yeah. So we have a new initiative called Freedom to Parent, Kids for the 21st Century. And I know Freedom to Parent is kind of what we call it. And I mean, for the 21st century it doesn't really roll off the tongue, but I love what it means, because what we're saying is, yeah, you can like it or not, but this is what our kids are talking about. This is what they're being exposed to.
Right.
So if you don't talk about it and you don't prepare your children and you refuse to have these conversations with them, you are not preparing your children to live in the 21st century. So here's the deal. We're fighting all this stuff all the time. We are like treading water. We're in it, or whatever analogy you wanted to use. We're fighting a battle against the extremists. But we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We still have to raise our children and prepare them to live in this world. We still have to, as the Biden administration has done, we still have to make good climate change policy. We still have to rebuild our infrastructure, even though we're fighting all this other stuff. And it's, but that's just the nature of it. Right. That's life. I mean, I think all of us are trying to work and deal with other things at the same time. So this is really nothing new. But we have to hold our ground on both fronts. And I would say when it comes to raising our children, we have to go a little further. We have to actually move the ball and make some progress. So, Freedom to Parent is really talking about those issues. It is pushing back on the book bans. We have a mobile ban book library that goes around. We're going to have more of those. And let's read this book. Let's unpack it. Let's talk about it in an age appropriate way, obviously. But as I mentioned, I have a 12-year-old. She comes to me with a lot of stuff that I never would have come to my parents about because I'd never heard those terms.
Yeah.
But in that, she's come to me with questions, and I just honestly say, Eleanor, I don't think this is something that you're really able to understand, but I'm going to explain it to you the best way I can right now. Right. I never asked these questions when I was your age because I never knew about these things.
Yeah.
But you were in this world, and I think it's good that we're talking about this now, because this means that children who are gay, children who are transgender, children who are being abused, all these things are talked about, and that gives them freedom. So it makes also the world a lot healthier place for them. Right. If that is uncomfortable, that leads to uncomfortable conversations for me. Okay, well, I live in a community and I want to be a good member of that community, and I will accept a little discomfort if that means that other people feel accepted. And frankly, I think most people are like that
Mm-hmm.
and are okay with that community idea. But you have a lot of people, again, who are just giving in to some people's worst nature and fighting against that. So,
Yeah.
freedom to parent is the pushback against that. It is saying we are a counter to the Moms for Liberty nonsense. We are going to help you in an age appropriate, a manageable way, how we can be accepting and raise our children to understand what's going on in the world. But it does not have to be a whole big thing. There's just a place between, a ridiculousness that I think everyone would agree is not healthy. And then absolutely, we're not going to talk about this because we don't talk about these things in our house. I mean, there's a middle ground.
Right. And there's conversations we have to have, and those conversations we'll fight, because what we're fighting is parents and people, and they're not even parents. And circling back to that stat I mentioned at the beginning of the show about the Washington Post article, what was really interesting, they looked at like 1,500 or over 1,000 of these book ban requests from last year, and what they found in the forms that asked you to identify who you were, just 15% of the people requesting book bans of some sort identified as parents. In other words, with all this talk of parental rights, with all this talk of control, because it's parents and parental rights, it's not actually parents doing this. It's not parents with kids in the school system. It's outside forces pushing against us as parents.
Yes.
In the end, the parental child ban is under assault by not by parents, right? It's not the schools either, right? It is, and arming the kids to fight that is so key, I think, and arming the parents even more so.
And that is an important thing. That's a stat that you should share with your friend who is talking about that they don't think, let's say Lawn Boy, for instance, is an appropriate book for children to read. First of all, I would encourage anyone who is concerned about these books to see at their local school what, children can only check out books that are on their level. Both their reading level and then, what's age appropriate. And I happen to have a really good friend whose son, and she's actually quite conservative, a fellow military spouse, and her son reads, when he was in second grade, he read on a high school level. But they said, no, yes, that's on his level academically, but he cannot check out that book because it's not developmentally appropriate for him. So he read what is that book? Once an Eagle.
Oh yeah.
He started reading a lot of military nonfiction and other things. His father is a military officer. Yeah. So he started reading a lot of nonfiction because that was acceptable. Yeah. But this is really an issue. So and that's another thing that it's just not said enough and is not understood enough. And the book bans, I have a former friend who's very active in Moms for Liberty.
Yep.
She's a homeschooler. She was homeschooled. Her children are homeschooled. But Moms for Liberty, she will go to school board meetings and she will fight for book bans and promote book bans, but she has no children in public school. And I honestly, I think where do you find this time? Why do you spend your time on this? This is absolute anathema to me.
Yeah.
But neither here nor there. It is very important to say to your friend who brings this up, interesting statistic I read is that only 15% of people who are pushing for book bans actually have children in public schools.
Yeah.
What do you say to that, Brenda?
Well, we're trying to save the world. I think it's a great place to take a pause for our sponsors. We have some great sponsors of the show, so we will take a break and come right back. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. And I'm not talking about some weird mind voodoo or a wacky message board. No, we're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Now, not everything in a bad habit is bad. So instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-nominated device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes in an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing anxiety while breaking your bad habit. The first time I used Fume, I was shocked at how flavorful and fresh it tasted. It's easy to hold and perfectly balanced, and quite honestly, extremely fun to fidget with. The real wood material and sleek design definitely classes it up, and I feel pretty darn cool holding it. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and honestly, even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories. There's no reason that can't be you. So join Fume, accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Now, head to tryfume.com and use code FRED to save 10% when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code FRED to save an additional 10% off your order today. And we're back. It's a great place to pivot to another aspect of your life that you've had to deal with for the last few years, and that, of course, is Donald J. Trump. I think few people have been more enveloped and had their lives more upended by this situation than you guys have. You and Alex, of course, you're dear friends, and I've known you for a while. We've had a chance to talk to you a lot. We just got word this week that the Mar-a-Lago documents fiasco may be coming to a head. Jack Smith has not one but two grand juries, apparently. And Mark Meadows, actually one of the main characters in this whole show, and the main characters in your show, has testified.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple question. How do you feel about that? I mean, joking aside, do you find hope at some point? I mean, your family has been pummeled. For those who don't know, Mark Meadows was one of the people who led the charge against Alex to have Alex essentially punished for doing his duty. I don't know if you want to touch that, but I mean, he
was encouraging an investigation that Alex didn't know about, but there were like several investigations into him. They all led to nothing because there was nothing to find. I mean, they could have called me. I could tell you horrible things about him. Not really horrible, but all the dirt, which is not really that exciting. But it didn't reach the level of him not being promoted to colonel. And Mark Meadows did lead that charge when he was chief of staff for Donald Trump. He, I'm sure, received a pardon of some sort for something. I mean, only Mark Meadows knows for sure. But I hope it's worth it. I hope that all of this leads to some kind of accountability. We had someone doing something. We recently moved, and we had someone doing something in our house, and Alex found out that this person was a big Trump fan. So they had a great discussion. He's actually not even a U.S. citizen here legally. Just want to point that out. But he, had a nice conversation with the guy and very respectful. But Alex said something like, Trump is not above the law. And the guy said, you're right. He's not above the law. And this is really a fundamental premise of democracy. And that's why I hope there is some accountability. I'm not sure that that's going to happen. And I've kind of resigned myself that even if it doesn't, we just have to do whatever we can. But it sure would be nice, Fred.
Yeah. I mean, you've had a long road. I mean, you turned your life into turmoil. You guys have been strong throughout. It's an inspiration to so many people that know you and just follow you. I constantly get messages every time I mention you. People say how much they find you and your husband is inspirational, and you've earned it. I also laugh because you moved to Florida. What the hell, Rachel?
I was so desperate to leave Virginia and the DC area that I was like, whatever. You moved to Florida. Lawn doesn't scare me. All right. Alligators, hurricanes, whatever.
Whatever. So you're in DeSantis land, and
I am. Yes. So we had good friends here that I must say, like Alex's best friend from his time in the Army.
Yep.
Moved here when he didn't fully retire, but after he served his 5 years after West Point. So, and we've always come here. Their friends have gotten to be our friends. Our daughter goes to camp where their children went to camp, and we've, slowly just kind of built a community here without living here.
Yeah.
And then for a variety of reasons, it just sort of worked best for us. And to be really honest, for my mental health, I could not stay in Northern Virginia and the DC area anymore. And so things moved a little faster than we thought, which was just fortuitous. And we were able to make it happen. So we moved earlier this year.
And I live in St. Louis. I get it. I left the same place, right? We came here.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to bring it up because, DeSantis, of course, is running for president. You got a front row seat to a lot of his policies. I got a lengthy little, so an interesting story. I did a video this week for Midas Touch about a recent Yahoo News YouGov poll on DeSantis' launch. Yes. And they did an interesting exercise in the poll of likely voters where they asked about the popularity of a string of policies that DeSantis has implemented, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but I'll read this part because I found it fascinating. To gauge whether DeSantis' agenda is helping or hurting his electability, Yahoo News and YouGov then pointed out that all 8 of the policy proposals that we just read you from the previous question have been put forward or signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And they repeated the question from earlier in the poll, asking respondents to describe their chances of voting for him next November. So they read his policies and they said, hey, would you vote for him? Notably, the number of independents who said they would definitely not vote for DeSantis rose a full 4% from 34 to 38. And the share of potential Republican primary voters, who said they definitely would vote for DeSantis, dropped by 6 from 55 to 47. In other words, when they found out what policies he's implemented as governor of Florida, his both independents and even Republicans, their opinions dropped of, and that includes the more guns, includes the abortion bans. And his latest one, of course, a huge impact. I think you and I talked about it before the show, is the law criminalizing the transport of undocumented people into Florida, requiring hospitals to ask about immigration status on intake forms, invalidating state driver's licenses or other forms of government issued to undocumented people, and preventing local governments from issuing any kind of ID cards. I mean, this is a state that relies on, you just said you had an immigrant working in your house, and this is a state that relies on agriculture immigrant. So with you being there, and I mean, what are you hearing on the ground? I mean, is that, it just sounds like when people find out who Ron DeSantis is, what a lot of people who live in Florida
they don't like him.
They don't like him, right?
So this person is a green card holder and able to work, but yes, not a Ron DeSantis fan. And anecdotally, I haven't met a lot of people, a lot of Trump people. I live in Broward County, which is very blue. Yeah. More blue than where I lived in Virginia. Yeah. And lots of Trump fans that I have met, not a lot, but the Trump fans that I have met are not DeSantis fans. And I don't think that's because the rivalry, they just don't see anything that he's done for Florida as being great or being relevant to them. They would be more like Marco Rubio fans, but just really more just kind of like, right. Not really interested either way, but he does not do it for them. Right. And the policies that he has put forth are not great. Right. Getting back to the Moms for Liberty, freedom to parent, the Greg Sargent wrote a great article, and it was about, and I'm not going to get it right. It's starts with an H, but I can't remember the name of the county.
Hamilton County, one of those. Yep.
It's like, I can't. But it was. See, this is what happens with the extremism: is you can get people, like, you tell them a little bit about it, and they might vote for you, and then whenever like the policies that they want to implement get implemented, they're like, wait, that's not what we wanted. That's not what we were expecting. I mean, it's like a used car salesman. Like, this is not the deal I thought I was getting. And that's what a lot of people have, the buyer's remorse, because what they got is not what they wanted. I mean, I think that's what happened with abortion. I mean, with the repeal of Roe is, wait a second, this isn't what we wanted when we elected you. And this is not popular with 70% of the population in the United States. So I am loath to say that I will give them enough rope to hang themselves, because the truth of the matter is, whether it's Roe or it's our children, it is people being used as pawns, and people will be hurt, people will be damaged, and I just can't say that makes it worth winning in the end. But I do think that's what's going to happen. I think that they are way over their skis, and we are going to see a reckoning of sorts. But in the meantime, it is very painful. And I think all of us, that is the lived reality that we're all in at the moment. So DeSantis, again, this is very anecdotally, and I live in a blue area. But
I asked for anecdotes.
Really that excited about him.
That's what. Yeah.
What? I just. it's that the stuff with Disney. I mean,
Right.
no one here hates Disney. People
Right.
like Disney. I mean, this idea, I'm going to stick it to the man, but they're also not idiots, and they know. I mean, there's there's a lot of news and a lot of polling about that's raising taxes for people in I think it's Orange County in the Orlando area. So no one really wins. I mean, do you think Disney is going to lose? No, the taxpayers are going to lose in that area, and ultimately the Florida residents of Florida are going to lose. And these are just not popular. His initiatives are not popular. The problem with Ron DeSantis is I think he is a true believer. Unlike Donald Trump, who's kind of like willing to do anything, the art of the deal is apparently just telling people whatever the hell they want to hear in order to gain favor. But Ron DeSantis actually believes the things, I don't know if I can curse on here, but he believes his own bullshit.
Right.
And he definitely, I think, believes a lot of these things and assumes that other people do as well. The good thing about him is he's just utterly charmless, no matter what they do, and all the program upgrades they have still have not been enough to overcome his worst instincts.
Well, that's it. I think there was a great anecdote that was put out the other day, a couple of days ago. I don't remember who highlighted it, but he was at an event in Iowa with the governor, and she's like, "Oh, Governor, there's a World War II veteran in the back." He's like, "Oh, great. Thank you for your service." And kept walking like, "Hey, Governor." And somebody else like, "Hey, there's a World War II vet. He'd love to meet you." "Well, hey, how you doing?" And handing the guy's VIP pass, he signs it, gives it back. And then somebody goes, "Hey, sir, that World War II vet," goes, "Yeah, I signed something before." It's like, you're just utterly, and retail politics does still matter. I mean, you can get away with a lot. It's funny how I was talking to somebody the other day, and how many older folks, believe it or not, older people like our age up, think you can just get away with just being an icon on social media. That's enough. And they don't realize how it is not enough. It is not enough just to be a talking point. You do actually have to engage human beings in politics.
Well, that's what Donald Trump had, right? Because he people thought they knew him from The Apprentice.
Thank you.
So he didn't really have to do a lot of that work because people felt like they knew him.
Right.
And that's part of the phenomena.
Right.
But DeSantis doesn't have that. And we were here over the holidays. We spent 2 weeks here. We were kind of looking at houses, but also we just spent like time with friends and just wanted to get away for warm weather.
Yeah.
And I remember watching the news and our daughter, it was just on like the local news. And Governor DeSantis was saying something that was good news. I can't remember what it was. It was something about like toll passes and it was good news, but you would have thought he was so mad. And our daughter was like, "Well, is he saying something good or bad?" And I was like, he's actually saying that they passed some legislation that was good legislation. But she was like, then why does he seem mad? And I was like, that's just because he has a really bad personality. But it's true. And he doesn't have that of like being able to engage with people. So he just always comes across as really gruff and pissed off. And maybe he is, but that is the retail politics thing that just is utterly not charming. And he doesn't have a persona to fall back on like Trump did.
That's the thing. We all dismiss Trump as being a buffoon and a clown, all those things. Yeah. Plus, he's losing his freaking mind. There's all those things.
Yeah.
But you do have to go back to the fact that Donald Trump is a master marketer of Donald J. Trump. He's marketed one product for 70 years. It's Donald Trump, and he's done well. I mean, for those of us who I went to West Point, so I dealt with him in the 80s when he was in New York. So we used to have to read the New York Times at West Point. It's a thing. I don't know if they still do it or not. So I was suffering through the early days that when he was quite the little New York icon, and hated there, by the way. But the thing is, he's a master marketer, right? And it's funny to see the wannabes who think they could just take this piece of the puzzle and then, and in DeSantis' point, it's like, well, I mean, his talking point is, well, I'm Trump without the baggage. Yeah, but you're also Trump without the charm. You're Trump without the humor. You're Trump without the market, right? It's like, it's true, right? There's a whole thing, and I think I'm an old PR guy in my previous life, and there's more to it than just the policies or the woke thing is a perfect example. And oh my God, I just have to say it on this show. I couldn't for some reason. Churchill's family has copyrighted his speeches, so you can't use them unless you pay for them, which sucks. And that whole woke speech he did the other day, "We'll fight woke in the school. We'll fight," was literally he used the great never surrender speech of Parliament. I mean, who thinks this is a good idea? I mean, that tight little circle is, but the lack of charm. I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. Obviously, Trump could, my friend, I think I mentioned the show last week. My friend Jeff Timmer said it so well. Because the only thing that will stop Donald Trump is his aorta or a prison cell. The guy is not a healthy guy. But yeah, you see it firsthand.
and that's the reality that I think we need to wrap our minds around. And it's even hard for me. That's why the CNN town hall was very emotional for me. I think anyone who follows me on Twitter could see that I was really upset about it. And that's why is like the danger. Ron DeSantis, I would be incredibly disappointed. I would really, really upset if he were to win the presidency. If Trump wins the presidency, my family will have to leave as political prisoners. So it is extremely, extremely personal. And I think that we are we are still a little bit slow to think that, oh, well, maybe Chris Christie or maybe this or maybe that. But as it looks right now, nothing is stopping him unless it's himself. He's the only person that can stop himself.
Well, that's in that same YouGov poll. They said that 30% of these Republican primary voters would simply not vote for anyone else. Period. Like, even if Trump's not on the ballot, they won't for So you've got 30% of what is now currently a Republican base who's basically said they're going to check out if it's not Donald J. Trump. So there's a certain fantasy going on that any of these guys can beat him in a fair fight. I love Chris Christie saying, "Well, I'm the best debate." I actually saw serious, and this is the part that you kind of get back to with the CNN thing is serious. I'm doing air quotes for those listening. Serious political commentators saying, yeah, but Chris Christie, he's strong in debates. Oh, my God. I mean, I'm a political operative. Debates don't change any. The idea that anybody who calls himself a political professional would say, well, he could win in the debate. That's fucking a fantasy. Well, probably said that. It's a complete fucking fantasy to think that just because he's good in a debate a couple of times is going to actually win the election. It's not, doesn't work that way. There's just delusion.
Definitely not today. Maybe.
No, yeah, not today.
This is not Nixon Kennedy. Okay.
Right.
It's not your grandparents.
Yeah.
Political campaigns. So that is silly. And I mean, Fred, honestly, I think that's where we kind of make the mistake. And you and I were discussing this about the Chris Licht article of we've got to live in the now. I mean, I think that was Chris Licht's biggest problem at CNN is he wants to go back to something that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, frankly, we have a whole lot of people that the normal Republicans that we talked about that want to go back to something that doesn't exist. I know that's hard. I don't like change. It's hard for me. It's hard for most people for change, but they're not accepting this moment where we are, the reality of the time we're living in. And it leads to some really poor decision making. And I think there are also people who support Trump, and that's why they support him, because they don't want to change. They don't want to be in a world where a person of color has the same opportunities that they have.
Right.
But they're really holding on and clinging to that. And that's just not the reality of where we are right now. So they're trying to legislate. They're trying to make policy to diminish those voices, that history, all those things is people trying to go back to a time, that is not where we are now. They will ultimately fail. I truly believe all of these things will fail, but it is very painful in the process.
Yeah, I saw a great analysis the other day, and God bless Twitter. I mean, it's a pain in the ass, but I see good stuff on there. And somebody actually went into the whole, I'm sure you've seen it too, is where whenever we say we're a democracy, there's usually someone on the right that says we're a constitutional republic. And I used to laugh it off, and Boebert does it, right? And I laughed it off. But this person did a great analysis, and their point being is the reason the right has glommed onto that is because by going through a constitutional republic style, the push for that is entrenching minority rule. In other words, the whole point of it, the danger of an open democracy is that the majority will overcome the minority. That minorities will never have a vote. The majority, whoever that is, will hold them accountable. The reason they're embracing that world now, the idea of minorities being able to rule, is because they're becoming the minority. Right? That we're
100%.
Right. We're going to be a majority and minority country in the next 20 years. In our lifetimes, probably, Rachel, the white race will be a minority race compared to other persons of color. Overall, and so there's a lot of change going on. There's this desperate attempt to entrench. We're seeing it here in Missouri, where it's a simple thing. You're seeing it everywhere, but here in Missouri we see it, and Ohio, by the way, as we speak, where they try to change we have a proposition law where if you get enough signatures,
in Ohio, we talked about it on our podcast because Red, Wine, and Blue started in Ohio. Yeah,
there you go.
I was floored when I learned about that.
Yeah,
you can explain it. I mean, I think it's important to explain.
No, you're the guest. It's exactly. It's like the idea they're trying to change the constitution of their state to stop people from having the power to petition their government and place ballot initiatives. Here in Missouri, we're trying to put abortion on the ballot, and that's making it crazy. So the Republicans desperately try to get rid of that whole process, right? Siri's really mad about it. Anyway, but they're trying to change the process. They're trying to entrench minority rule. I think it's interesting. You guys talked about in Ohio, and it's huge in Ohio. It's coming up with August, right? Is that election, I think? Or
and they're trying to make it from 50% to 60 or more. I don't know, but they're trying to move the goalpost again because they don't want it to be the majority to rule. And you're right. I think that's a great analysis. I don't often go to my husband for national security and geopolitical analysis, but I do find when I do, he's often right. And he is a political scientist. Yeah. And I was like, Alex, why do they keep saying this stuff about whatever? And he was like, well, because they're stupid. And I was like, but also, is there another reason? And he explained it actually like you just did. And it's simply not true, but it is setting up a minority rule type, normalizing that, all the things. Right. He also told me, I'm just going to say, whenever the drone hit the Kremlin, I was like, a lot of people on Twitter are saying it was a false flag. And he was like, it's not a false flag. It's absolutely not a false flag. And I was like, okay, you're really adamant about this. And I was like, why do you think that? He was like, because I know it's not. And as it turns out, I think he's actually was right. But it wasn't the Twitter hot take. So be careful who you listen to on Twitter. They might not be the biggest expert. There's my PSA for the day.
I appreciate that PSA. It's a good one, especially in the world of Elon.
You should have Alex on your show. I
had him. He was my first guest. He was my first studio guest.
Sorry. He is an expert.
Yes, you can talk to each other. He was my first in studio guest. Matt will tell you. Yeah, he was
I don't know how I missed that.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's kind of messed up. I'll send it to you. I'll send your husband's take. And by the way,
watch the show, so I'm a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I just don't watch Alex a lot.
Well, it's been 8 months now, right, Matt? I think we've been doing this for a while. Matt's sick of my shit. We've been doing this for a while. That Alex was my first in studio guest. You were my first guest, period, and then Alex was my first video in studio guest. So I've got great. I'm using the hell out of the Vindman family. I admit it freely.
I mean, we have been friends since 2020. You were the first restaurant. We went to a restaurant and met you, and Alex was like, "Where are we going? What are we doing?" I was like, "Oh, we're going to Richmond." This guy that I met on Twitter, he was like, "Okay, Rachel, super normal, isn't that?" But it was, and you have been a true friend to us. And you and I talk very often, but we love you, and I'm very proud of you for doing the show. But I also think it's making a difference because, as we can see with CNN, and just cable news in general, it's a big commitment to watch a show on cable news. And having something that's more accessible, that's kind of anytime, and being able to get the facts, though, because I don't really want to know both sides if one side is crazy. I'm not interested in hearing crazy, but I am interested in, just like on my podcast, I'm interested in having a conversation about how we can make things better and how we can have conversations with other people in order to make things better. And that is something that you can only get if you have a rational source. And that's why I think, the Midas Network and others, all of it is gaining in popularity, and the landscape is shifting in that way. And because people really do know where they could watch a show for an hour or two, but are they really going to learn something that's going to help them have a conversation with their neighbor, and maybe a conversation that might change their mind and present a side of that they haven't seen. That's really what we need. And in order to be able to do that with confidence, we need to have trusted sources.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So kind. And my feelings are mutual. You and your husband have been dear friends to me and supportive. Hey, when I call you with crazy ideas like, hey, let's do an ad for the Lincoln Project. And to tell that story before I let our viewers go is I said, let's do an ad.
And who was the star? Who was the star, Fred?
You were. I wrote it for you. The story has to be set straight. So for those who don't know, and I'll post it on my Substack. We did an ad, and I pitched the idea. I was in Utah, and I pitched the idea to Rick Wilson. He's like, I love it. Let's do it. And I called you first, and you're like, yeah, we're doing it. I says, Alex, and she goes, I'll make them. Don't worry about it. Just so I went to Wilson. I said, hey, the Vindman's gonna do an ad. He's like, okay, write it. I said, I've never written an ad, but okay, I'll write it. And I wrote it for you because two reasons, and one was, we all saw Alex at that point on TV. We knew Alex in a certain sense. We didn't know you. We didn't know what you had gone through as a family, what your family had gone through. Two, I know your husband well enough to know he's a complete fucking stiff. So, I love him with all my heart, but he's a stiff. And so I wrote the whole thing, and then Wilson and the director all rewrote it on the spot. Then my son's texting me from your house saying, "Oh my God, they're rewriting the script." But man, what a lovely ad! I'll post that because people need to see it. It was just it was very, but again, it was very brave of you, though. I mean, that was one of your first time you came out. I think.
Well, yeah,
you really took a stand, and that was a courageous act, in my opinion.
I will say just quick in Alex's defense, one time our two nieces were talking. They were like 3 and 4 at the time. And they had a discussion. I overheard them about whether Uncle Alex was a big kid or an adult. So he is incredibly fun in real life, but not behind a camera. So it's like something happens. Yeah. I mean, like that is the thing. It's like I'm going to see my nieces soon, and Alex is coming, and I had a conversation with him yesterday, and they both started crying, like legitimate tears. So I am not the fun one, but
he is. That's
so
exactly
when I say
it.
I was a star, I just say because I can like hit my lines. That's it.
That's it. I meant. You hit your lines. Yes.
I tell this story often. The Lincoln Project ad was the first thing I did. And you and I talked about this. I called you. I still remember where I was driving in my car because I found out that Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, we're doing a lot of free press for The Atlantic in this episode.
Yeah, I know.
The Atlantic, he wrote the Suckers and Losers article in which he said that President Trump called people who serve in the military suckers and losers.
Yep.
And I found out that his family had to move out of their house because of death threats they were receiving. And I was like, that is it. Enough is enough. Alex had retired. I was like, I'm speaking out. We are normal people. There's nothing like we're just normal people. And this is happening to us. And Jeffrey Goldberg and his family are normal people. And this is what happens in authoritarian countries is normal people are attacked. And we have to tell the story. We have to say, this is not okay. And this is who they are. And that's why, I'm sorry, I'm going really long, but that is one thing about the Chris Lick story that was in The Atlantic. His press PR executive, which I don't know about that, because I thought it was like one of the most damning lines in the article, is he said, well, what Chris is trying to say is if everything that Trump said was an 11, like when he was insulting women and that was an 11, then what is it when we cover it the same way, whenever he's actually attacking democracy? I'm like, then it's a 15 or it's a 20, right. But you cover all of that because these people who are voting for him, they need to see who he is all the time. And the people who are fighting against it, they need to see what they're fighting against all the time. You cover it all. And that's it. Yeah. So you have to talk about all of it. And I think us standing up and talking about our experience was and is important because I know what it's like to live in an authoritarian country. I lived in Russia for 3 years when Alex served at the embassy there. And this is a place where my friends, I worked, and they didn't feel comfortable talking about things inside buildings when cell phones were around because they understood the reality of the country where they lived. And if that's what you want to live in, then vote for Donald Trump. If you don't, then you need to fight like hell to make sure that our country never becomes that because it can easily.
I love it. And I'm going to end you there because that's perfect. What a great place to start. That's exactly it. And that is the battle we're up against. This is real. It's not. We had Ruth Benguet on the show. Here's her book,
Yeah.
Strongman.
Her book is so good.
They're all there. If you should follow, by the way, I recommend her Substack, Lucid on Substack. It's real. The signs are there. And, if you ignore them, we will suffer the consequences.
It's hard to read, but it's really good.
It is. It's painful to read. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Fred.
It's always a pleasure seeing you. Good excuse to, I joke all the time that the only reason I had the podcast is to talk to cool people and friends. And here you are. So thanks so much. I appreciate your time. And thanks for coming on Midas Touch. I'm going to give you the last note about the Midas Touch Network you'll love. When this gets posted, you can read the comments, Rachel. You can actually read the comments on the video because it's a wonderful community of caring people.
I look forward to it.
I literally watch my show when it comes on. I'm there live when it comes on. It airs at 11 o'clock Eastern on Friday nights. And I literally watch the comments rolling in. And it's gratifying, especially after what you and I have been through, to actually be in a community that is supportive and kind. And most I get shit
it
for
really
talking
does
too
mean
fast.
a lot to us.
I talk too fast. I get that a lot, but it's lovely. And my laugh.
Too.
It's all good. But we got it. Thank you, dear. It was good seeing you. Thanks for joining the show. And stay out of trouble, sister.
I'll try.
Man, what a great conversation. And what a great place to finish talking about the real danger of authoritarianism and fascism. I'm going to pull this out. This book is Strongmen. Former guest Ruth Benguet, who is just a fascinating human being. She has a Substack you should follow called Lucid. We should post that episode again sometime, Matt. It was a great conversation. I have to laugh, though. This past week was D-Day, the anniversary of D-Day. And it kind of goes to what we're dealing with. Lauren Boebert, being Lauren Boebert, posted a picture of herself kneeling. Here's the picture. We'll put the picture on screen. Kneeling before a grave, I believe at Arlington, placing a flag, and how we must remember those who served on D-Day and their glory, all these things. Classic Boebert performative patriotism. What I love about the veteran community is someone actually, you could see the number of the marker. And so someone on Twitter actually looked up that actual gravestone and discovered it's actually a World War I veteran. The whole thing was just more made up fake patriotism that we see all the time. They're happy to use us as veterans. When I say they're happy to use veterans as a foil against Biden, happy to use us as a prop when they want to get patriotism points. But in the end, it's all fake. It wasn't even a World War II veteran. She was putting a flag in front of it, but it was a great angle and her makeup looked great. And that's really all that matters. That's what we're up against. Authoritarians do that too. Well, I'm so glad you found our show. I hope you're listening on your favorite podcast platform as we go into summer and you travel. Take the show with you. You can find us on Apple, and Spotify, and Google, and Amazon. Our algorithm works a very simple way. If you leave a nice review, a 5-star review, or you say something nice, or you comment, or you share, that helps more people see this show and have these discussions. As I mentioned, we're on the Midas Touch Network. We premiere Friday nights at 11. Thank you to our sponsors for the episode, our friends at Fume, which is really just a wonderful device. It's healthy. I've used mine. It is a great partner for us. And of course, our partners at Vi Media. Vi Media is a digital marketing agency. They own my studio right here at HalfCo Studios. They are a wonderful partner for you in all your digital marketing needs. They are a national company based right here in St. Louis, Missouri. All your digital marketing, all your help getting your word out. That's VIE.media, Vi Media. You can't miss them. And with all that, you can find me as always on Twitter at FP Wellman. My Instagram is FP Wellman Official. The show is On Democracy Pod on Twitter, and on and on and on. You can find it all. Of course, please follow the Midas Touch Network with all of their channels on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else for the shorts. Of course, their YouTube channel. We are here every week. I have another great guest next week. I think you're going to find very interesting. As always, thank you. Thank you for bringing the fight by our side. We can't do this without you. And thank you to this wonderful community. And I can't wait to see you next week.